So pursuant to Section 800, Subdivision 4 of the Masons Manual, that that governs House proceedings in addition to the House and joint rules pursuant to House Rule 4-2, witnesses before a legislative body or its committees need not be sworn in unless there is some rule or provision of law or of the Constitution requiring it, but witnesses give their testimony under the penalty of being adjudged guilty of contempt and punished if they testify falsely. While Mason's Manual does not require an oath, we will be asking each witness to take an oath to assure the committee that the witness's testimony is accurate. So if you would please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I do swear or affirm that the testimony I am about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God. Thank you. Please have a seat. Would you please turn your mic on and identify yourself for the record?
Okay, my name's Tim Bormann. I'm Chief of Staff at the Office of the Attorney General.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming today and being willing to answer our questions. With that, I'm going to open it up to the committee for questions. Representative Stevens.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Sorry we made you wait.
That's all right.
And thank you for your service to the state of South Dakota. For the committee's background, could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Born in Corsica, South Dakota. Spent a few years doing a few different things before I went to law school at the University of South Dakota. After graduating law school, passing the bar exam, I was in Falkton. That would have been 2001. I served as a Falk County State's Attorney for about 16 years. Spent some time as mayor of Falkton. And then in 2019, I came and took the position as Chief of Staff at the Attorney General's office. Been in Pierce since then.
Okay. And what year did you go to law school then?
I graduated in 2001, so I was started in 98.
Okay. And did you go to law school with the Attorney General?
I did.
Okay. And your job is one that he appointed you to?
Yes.
Okay. And what I'd like to do is go back to the night of this incident, and could you tell the committee when you first became aware of that something had occurred with the Attorney General?
I don't have the exact time, but I received a text message. It was after 10 p.m. on that night with a picture of the Attorney General's vehicle with the damage to the front end.
Okay, and you remember what that text message indicated to you?
I mainly just remember the photo of the vehicle. I know I texted him back asking if he was okay, what had happened, and he said that he was okay, didn't know what he had hit.
Okay, maybe we could have the, maybe to help, we can look at some of the text that'll, if I could ask you a couple more questions after that. I think that's under North Dakota Report 12. And could you tell me, sir, is that what the text message that you're referring to is?
Yes, that would be the one.
Now, I notice on that text message, it indicates two people. So it'd be you, the Attorney General, and was there someone else that received that text message?
I believe, judging from what I can see at the top, it would have been Dave Natvig.
Okay, DCI?
Correct.
Okay. And then you received a couple of subsequent text messages, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, maybe we could show the next one. And so this first one is one that was sent to you and then you responded, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then this next one, can you tell us about that one? If you recognize this one.
Yes, I do.
Okay, is that one you also received subsequent to the first one?
Yes.
Okay, now the blue, that is you?
Yes, it is.
And then we have the Attorney General, then we have Mr. Natvig, is that correct?
That's correct.
And At any point, did the Attorney General indicate to you that he had hit a deer, or is that something that you assumed, or
That
how
was
did
something I assumed.
Okay. And let's go to the next one. And is that the last text message that you received from the Attorney General? On this day?
To the best of my memory, yes, that would have been the end of that discussion.
Okay. So then, tell me what occurred then after that. What involvement did you have with the Attorney General the next day?
Well, it would have been later after those text messages. I received a call from the Attorney General, a voice call, telling me that he was on his way back to Pier in a vehicle that had been lent to him by Sheriff Volek. And he asked me at that time if I would be willing to swing by the next morning, Sunday morning, around 8, and follow him when he brought that vehicle back to Highmore to return to the sheriff, and that I'd give him a ride back to Pier.
Was there more than one phone call that evening from the Attorney General?
I don't recall. I remember that call.
Well, did he call you initially and to tell you that the sheriff had allowed him to use his car? Do you remember that?
Yes.
And then subsequently, he called again and asked you to pick him up the next morning or follow him back to the sheriff's home?
It could have been 2 calls. I don't recall if it was 2 calls, but that is the gist of the conversations I had with the Attorney General that evening, yes.
So whether it's 1 or 2 calls, I guess really doesn't make any difference at this point, but I guess I'm wondering, was there any other conversations that you had with the Attorney General as to what occurred that night, other than him telling you that he borrowed a car and needed a ride the next day?
Mainly just making sure he was okay, that he was okay to drive, that he hadn't been injured, and then setting a time for the next morning.
Okay, and what was his demeanor like?
He seemed like someone who had just had a scare, but from the phone call, he was happy to be on the road getting home.
Okay, so then tell us what happened the next day.
The next morning, like I said, I believe it was probably around 8. I was in my personal vehicle. I went to the Attorney General's house. Jason was waiting, pretty much ready to go, and backed out of his driveway. He backed out in Sheriff Volek's vehicle. I followed him back to Highmore. On that drive, he had said that he wanted to fill Sheriff Volek's vehicle with gas, return it to him with a full tank. So we drove all the way into Highmore to that one gas station, which is on the south side corner where you turn into town.
At Shell Station?
Yes, I believe it is.
Okay.
He filled the vehicle with gas, and while he was filling, I got out of my vehicle. He mentioned that he had seen some pieces of his vehicle. He wanted to stop at that scene and just look around to see if he could get an idea of what had happened the night before. I was like, that's fine. Followed him to that site. He pulled in. There was a large piece of undercarriage from the car on the shoulder of the road, and I parked a couple of car lengths or so behind. He got out of his vehicle. He started walking west. I got out of mine, started walking to the east. I was looking at glass and other bits and pieces that were along the roadway.
Now, let me interrupt you. I'm sorry, just so
Okay.
I can get this. So then, where did you guys approximately stop? And what was the thing in the roadway that caught your attention where this is where we're going to stop? He
There
decided.
was a large piece of plastic, something from the undercarriage, probably from his vehicle that night before. And he pulled over onto the shoulder in front of that piece. I pulled in behind it. We didn't touch that piece of vehicle. It was just there.
Sure. So then you started walking east.
I was looking at the glass and everything. I started walking towards the east, towards town. He was walking towards the west. And then I heard him call my name.
Okay, now let me stop you there. So when you're driving into town, did you look at the site itself? I mean, you could see obviously car parts and those type of things, right?
I didn't really pay attention. I was just following him in.
Okay. All right. So then he's heading west, and then all of a sudden he calls out to you. And when you guys, I guess when you went to stop there, what were you there to look for?
I stopped because he stopped. He wanted to look to see if he could get any idea of what it was he had hit, I guess, but I really can't conjecture as to what was in his mind, what he was looking for.
Okay. All right. So he's heading west from the larger piece from his vehicle, and then he calls out to you.
Yes.
And about how far away was he from where his front of his car was to where he called out to you, approximately?
I honestly can't say. I didn't notice.
And about how long was it from the time that he started walking, would you say, until he called out to you?
Not very long, maybe a minute.
Okay. All right. So then what did he tell you?
He called my name. I turned and looked at him. He was motioning towards the ditch with one hand saying, "There's a man."
Okay.
I went over and to where he was motioning and looked, and I saw Mr. Beaver's body in the ditch.
Okay, and where was the Attorney General standing at that time? Was he on the shoulder? Was he on the road? Where was he?
He was on the shoulder.
Okay, and how far away was he from the decedent's body?
I can't say with any great certainty. I had moved between him and the body. I was probably about 10, 15 feet. I was still on the shoulder. I did not step into the grass, and he was on the opposite side of me.
And could you describe to the committee here how the ditch is laid? I mean, some ditches, are kind of deep, and then some of them are more gentle. Can you explain to the committee what you recall it looked like?
It wasn't freshly mowed, but it wasn't completely overgrown. I wouldn't call it an overly steep ditch, but it did have some slant to it, downhill slant.
And approximately how far was the body from the road?
In my recollection, maybe 5 feet, 6 feet, but don't quote me on that.
Okay. Did the Attorney General ever get any closer to the body when he first discovered it?
Not while I was standing there, no.
Okay, and did you get any closer?
I did not.
Okay. What other things did the Attorney General have to say once he discovered the body?
He did not say much of anything.
Did he say that this isn't good?
Not that I recall hearing.
Okay. And so then, what did you and the Attorney General do?
Based on where we were, we could see Sheriff Bullock's driveway. It's about a quarter mile, a little over a quarter mile from the site where we were at. I might have said we should get Sheriff Bullock and get him back here, get someone on the scene as soon as possible. And I knew that the sheriff was waiting for the Attorney General to return his vehicle, so we drove directly to his house. When we pulled on the yard, Sheriff Bullock came out of his house. I did not leave my vehicle. The Attorney General got out. He and the sheriff had words, discussed things, and then we got back into the vehicles, took the sheriff right to the scene where Mr. Beaver's body was.
So when you left the scene, did you bring both vehicles, or did you get
We
into
brought
one?
both vehicles.
Okay. So you followed him here. He gets out. He talks to the sheriff. Could you hear what their conversation was?
I did not.
Okay. And so then the sheriff gets in the vehicle with the Attorney General, and then the two cars go back, or is there three now?
There are two cars that went back. The sheriff's vehicle was left. He got in, I want to say he got in his patrol vehicle, I believe. The Attorney General got back into my vehicle, and we drove back to the site, parked. Sheriff Volek got out, showed him what we had discovered.
Okay, and so from the ride from the sheriff's residence to where the decedent's body was located, did you have any conversations with the Attorney General?
I did not say anything, no.
And what was his demeanor in the car?
He was quite obviously shook. He didn't have a lot of color in his face.
Okay. And so then when you got to the scene, what happened next?
Sheriff Volek went and took a look at the body, came back.
So he walked down the ditch to the body?
He walked, I honestly can't recall how close he got to the body. He walked down to the area.
But he got closer than you did?
Yes, he did.
Okay, but it was obvious that Mr. Beaver was dead?
Yes. It was.
Okay.
He came back, he informed the Attorney General that he was going to be calling, at that point in time, I believe he said, I'm going to be calling DCI, Highway Patrol, get him in to take a look at the situation. Sheriff Volek then looked at me, told me to take Jason back to Pier, and he said, don't leave him alone, stay with him, you know, for the time being. We'll call as we get more information.
Now, you've been in law enforcement for how long?
Been involved since I was in Falkton, either as a defense attorney and then as state's attorney.
Did it surprise you that, because this is about what time in the morning, 10, 11 o'clock in the morning?
Somewhere around, yeah, 9:30, 10.
Well, I guess in your law enforcement experience, did it surprise you that the sheriff would want the person who's involved in this incident to leave the scene without being interviewed?
It didn't seem like normal operating procedure, but I've also never been a sheriff, so I wasn't about to second guess how he was going to handle things.
Well, but you've been a state's attorney, right?
Yes.
Is that what you'd wanted the law enforcement to do, is to send the person involved in the incident home?
As a state's attorney, not necessarily, but also as a state's attorney, you get handed cases sometimes that you really don't like the way things were put together, and you just have to deal with it.
Sure, I understand. And I wasn't criticizing you at all. I was just wondering with that. I guess the other question that I have is that when we were looking at those text messages, do you, and you may not know the answer to this, and so I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I found it interesting that, you know, the text message that was sent out was also sent to the DCI at the same time. Do you know if that's his normal course of action? Just, I mean, under these circumstances, to send it to you and the DCI?
The Attorney General will text things to myself and Mr. Nadvig, sometimes as a group text, sometimes individually. I guess it isn't anything I've really ever paid attention to as to when it makes sense, when it doesn't.
So it didn't surprise you any?
It didn't really surprise me. At the time, as you saw, I assumed he probably had hit a deer or something. My initial reaction was he was showing us the damage he had done to his vehicle and that he was okay.
Okay. Well, and you and the Attorney General, as well as Mr. Nadbig, were you classmates?
The Attorney General and I were classmates in law school. Mr. Nadbig was a year ahead of us in law school.
Okay, so you're all kind of law school friends.
Yes.
Okay. So then when the sheriff told you to take the Attorney General back to Pier, did you have any conversations with the Attorney General at that time?
I did not. That was a very quiet drive.
Okay. And So then, when you got back to Pier, tell us what happened next.
When we got back to Pier, pardon me, when we got back to Pier, we went to the office. At that point in time, Jason had said he should probably call his dad, let him know what was going on. I sent him into his office. I went into my office. I contacted Charlie McGuigan and David Natvig, both to let them know what had developed throughout the morning and what was going on. And other than that, I just sat in my office, let my wife and family know I was not going to be home for a while, and just hung out, waited, made sure he was okay, that things were okay.
And how long did he stay at the Attorney General's office then?
I know I didn't get home until 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
How long was a drive was it for you from Highmore to Pier?
What is that, about 50 minutes to an hour, somewhere in that area? I don't rightfully know. It isn't a drive I take often.
Sure. So would you have gotten back to Pier around noon?
A little bit before, yes.
Okay. And then you left around 4:30?
4:30 or 5, I
Sure.
believe.
Was the Attorney General still in his office then?
He was,
Okay. So when you left, he was still there?
yes.
And when, did you go in and check in on him during that 4.5 hours that you were there?
Yeah, I'd get up, knock on the door, see if he was okay, if he needed anything.
And what was he doing?
Like I said, he visited with his father. He was just sort of passing time, looking at things. If he wanted to talk, I would have been there to let him talk. I just figured let him be and let him think about what was going on, because it isn't a normal situation.
Sure. Are you aware of any other phone calls he made besides other than that to his father?
I believe he may have contacted his auto insurance. I was not privy to any other phone calls.
So during the time that he was there, he didn't ask you to come in and talk about the incident?
No.
Okay. Would you have any idea when he went home?
I know he wasn't there overly late, but I don't have a time, no.
Okay. And as the chief of staff, did you have any other times that you discussed this matter with him?
Not really that day. There was more discussion the next day, but that was more at looking at how things were moving forward. And that would be primarily from my point, acting as chief of staff. One of my duties is also public information officer and spokesperson for the Office of the Attorney General. And as I considered the situation through Sunday and then into that next morning, Monday, it was my feeling that I could not adequately be the spokesperson for the Office of the Attorney General and also the spokesperson for him on a personal level with this matter. And that it was at that time I had to, I guess, for lack of a better term, build a wall and divide that off. He was going to need someone to handle that personal aspect of it if I was going to handle the office aspect of it. I didn't think it was fair to be working for the state of South Dakota, the people of South Dakota, and taking that wage, but then doing that as part of my job, which it was not.
Mm-hmm. So did you have any conversations with Mr. Nadvig about this incident?
Aside from letting him know the developments after we had discovered that it was Mr. Beaver that had been struck and that this is what had happened, and that that I had Jason at the office, that was really the extent of that conversation.
Okay. I think that's all the questions I have. Thank you, Mr. Bormann.
Further questions, Representative Jensen?
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Just a couple questions. You stated when you got to the scene, you parked your car and you got out, and you saw there was glass. Do you recall if there was any glass on the roadway, or was it all on the shoulder, or can you kind of give us some recollection of where the parts of the car were?
The large part that we saw that we stopped near was on the shoulder. My recollection is looking at glass along the fog line, just scattered across, and that's really, unfortunately, I'm not a crash expert. I was looking at what I saw.
Yeah, I was just wondering, yeah, exactly what your recollection was where the glass was when you first noticed it, say, near the fog line. So, the other question I had was, when you went to the sheriff's house and you said they had an exchange, a conversation, how long did that conversation last, or do you know about how many exchanges they had back and forth before they got in the vehicle?
I really can't say with any certainty. They stood outside talking to each other a couple of minutes, but I really can't be held to an exact time.
Okay, I think I had one more note. You know, I guess, can you give us a little bit of an idea what the nature of the conversation was on the drive back?
There really was no conversation. It was very quiet. He was not in the mood to talk. I was not going to press him to talk if he didn't want to.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Sure. Representative Schwab.
Mr. Getz, could we put the text message back up? Second one. The one on the left there. Can you see that okay, Mr. Bormann?
Yes.
Yes. So my question was, in the Attorney General's text message here, he says he hit something in the road. It didn't show any blood or anything in the car. And I was just curious if you had any conversations with him about the efforts that he made to look in the car for signs of what he hit. Was there any follow-up to that conversation, either in a separate text message or in a phone call, about the efforts that he made to look around his car to figure out, what happened?
No, I didn't have any conversations with him about looking in his car. I think the extent of it would have been, did you see any fur or anything on the vehicle that might give you an idea of what you hit?
Okay. So you did actually have a conversation about fur or something?
No, but I assume by that message that's what he meant. I see what you're asking, because he said, or anything in the car.
Mm-hmm.
We did not have any discussions about looking in his car.
Okay.
Or anywhere else.
At any time?
No.
Okay. Okay. And then on the car ride home, in this last text message in this chain, the Attorney General says he's still not sure what fully happened as I was just driving along. He indicated that that he called you on his way back to Pier. On that call back when you guys spoke, when he was driving home, did you follow up at all to figure out, if he had learned anything more? Because that's the last text message in this chain.
I did not. It was getting late by that time. The fact that he was almost back to town, that he had a vehicle, he was almost back to town, I just left it at that.
Okay. Do you recall what time he called you on the way back?
I do not. I mean, it was late. It was after 11.
Yeah. Where were
Because
you?
I know
when
that
he-
I was getting ready to go to bed when he sent the initial text with the picture of the vehicle.
Okay. So you were at home the whole time
Yes,
during these text messages and the phone call?
yes.
Okay, thanks. In your testimony, you mentioned something on Monday. You had decided that you couldn't be the spokesperson for the office and for him personally on this matter. Explain to me, I guess, why you made that decision.
As a public information officer, I could see that there was going to be a lot of interest, there were going to be a lot of calls. I cannot adequately do my job representing the office of the Attorney General and the other things that I do for that office if all I was going to do was be fielding calls as to the personal nature of the situation that he was in. That would not be fair to the people who pay my salary, it wouldn't be fair to the office.
So that was on that Monday, the day after the crash. Did you take any calls relating to the incident?
There were calls. Our office took quite a few calls. I don't remember the exact time frame, but I know that at some point the Attorney General got an individual to be taking care of that for him. Mike Deaver would have been his name. And we started directing all such calls to Mr. Deaver from
Okay.
our office.
So prior to Mike Deaver's involvement, were you working with the Attorney General at all in terms of how he should handle this from a public relations standpoint?
I honestly was doing everything I could, seeing where it was going to be an ostrich and build a wall and just take care of the matters for the office.
So the answer is no?
Correct, no.
Okay. And on that Monday, the Attorney General put out a statement outlining his recollection of what happened. On the Attorney General's letterhead, did you have any involvement in the drafting of that statement?
I did not.
Okay. Is the Attorney General's office fully staffed right now?
I believe we have a couple of vacancies. I can't say for sure.
Pardon, Mr. Chair? Okay. Has this affected the ability of the office to get any work done in a timely manner?
You know, no, it has not. The Office of the Attorney General, and this is a statement that I've made numerous times when I was a state's attorney in Falk County, is staffed with some of the best and brightest attorneys in the state. And these are people who take their duty and their jobs very personally and very professionally. And that is something that they continue to do on a daily basis, day in and day out. The office has continued to operate. Our appellate division continues to work on appeals, prepare briefs, prepare arguments. Our criminal litigators continue to prosecute at the request of state's attorneys and on cases they're involved in. Our civil division continues its work on multi-state and other cases that the state is involved with. Our Consumer Protection Division is taking calls from citizens every day. The work continues every day, and they continue to do their job to the best of their ability.
Okay. Going back to that press release that the Attorney General put out, do you know, did he have any help in drafting that?
I cannot say. I mean, I'm sure somewhere along the line people proofread. It happens, but I can't say who.
I'm curious because that was on the Attorney General's letterhead. When other press releases typically go out on the Attorney General's letterhead, do you have to approve them before they go out as the Chief Public Relations Officer?
Every press release that goes out is on press release letterhead, which I have, and it goes through me. I do the initial drafting. I have people who proofread for me before those go out. I don't have that press release in front of me, but if I remember correctly, I think it was on regular letterhead. I don't believe it was on the press release letterhead that I make use of, but I don't have it in front of me to say for sure.
Okay. In your conversation with investigators, you mentioned something about the Attorney General telling you about listening to a Twins game. Do you recollect that at all?
He had mentioned that he was on the drive back from Redfield, something about listening to the Twins game, that he had called his father on the phone.
And when did he mention that to you?
I don't recall when that conversation was had. I just know it was something I had heard.
Was it that night on the way home?
I can't say.
Okay. Earlier in your testimony, too, if I may, Mr. Chair, you mentioned you didn't want to second guess, or you mentioned you didn't want to second guess Sheriff Volek. But when I listened to your testimony to the investigators, you were pretty critical of him. Do you recall that?
I probably could have been, yes.
Okay.
It just feels a little bit more rude to say something a bit more critical now with Sheriff Volek being deceased.
Okay.
Sheriff Volek was someone who I knew for a lot of years when I was in Falk County, and Mike was a good man.
So, I mean, are we second guessing him, or are we not second guessing him then?
What I said in the interview with the North Dakota investigators, I would stand by, but today I really didn't want to feel like I came up here to throw Sheriff Volek under the bus.
Sure. Okay. No further comments, questions?
One more, Representative Jensen, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, a follow-up from my earlier question. I just want to make sure I have it right in my mind. When you pulled up to the accident scene and you both got out of the cars, you were walking east back towards Highmore?
I was walking back towards Highmore, yes.
Right. So when you were looking at the glass on the roadway, I'm going to go back to that, about how far back down the roadway were you before Jason called your name?
I really hadn't gotten that far. When he called my name, I was maybe 10, 15 feet past the back end of my vehicle. I wasn't walking fast, I was just looking at it.
Okay, thank you, that's all.
Representative Hansen, did you have some questions?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Bormann, for being here. I just want to go back, first of all, to the moment right after the Attorney General discovers the body. You said that he pointed towards the ditch and called your name and waved you over. And can you tell us what happened immediately afterward?
He, like I said, he called my name. I looked at him, he said, "There's a man." I walked over in the general direction of where he was pointing, between him and the ditch, and saw Mr. Bieber.
And what was the Attorney General's demeanor like at that time?
Again, he was very shook. Not a lot of color in his face. He's usually a little bit louder than when he talked at that point in time. It was rather subdued and quiet.
And what did he say?
He called my name, said, "Tim Bormann." I looked over, he goes, "There's a man." And that was about it.
Did he say anything after that?
If he did, I don't recall what it would be.
So did he, when you arrived at the spot where the body was laying, was he standing there with you? Did he sit down? Did he put his hands on his knees? I mean, what was he like in that moment?
He was standing to my right, a little bit behind me. I really can't tell you what his posture was. I found myself on a Sunday morning looking at a dead body in a ditch. I'm sorry, but I really wasn't paying attention to his body language at that time.
Okay. Between the time that you received that text message the night before and then that morning, did the Attorney General ever tell you that he had hit a deer?
Not to my recollection, no.
Did it ever strike you at any time that he was uncertain about what he had hit?
It was something that he said, I don't know what I hit. Again, that morning, wanting to see if he could get some idea of what he had hit. But at the time, did it strike me as odd? No.
So did you ever get the impression that the Attorney General had thought that he had hit something other than a deer?
I never really got that impression, but I can't say what was in his mind.
So when did the Attorney General first, I mean, we've seen the text messages obviously, but when was the first time that the Attorney General sort of related his story as to what had happened leading up to the impact?
I heard more of it on Monday as that day started and began to progress.
And what did the Attorney General say about the events leading up to the impact?
I'm not sure I understand what events are you talking about in particular.
So I'm saying in the moments prior to impact, so did the Attorney General tell you about his drive home that night prior to the impact, what he was doing in his vehicle at the time before the impact?
Somewhere, and we covered it in the questions. I don't remember when the conversation was had, but I know he talked about listening to the Twins game. He talked about calling his father. He talked about when he drove through Highmore, coming back up to speed as he was on the way back to Pier, and the accident occurred. When that information all came to me, I don't really have a distinct recollection of when that conversation occurred. It's things that I know I heard, and that's all I can really relay, but it was also things like that that let me know that I have to build that wall, because I can't do my job for the office of the Attorney General if I'm neck deep in this other aspect.
Did the Attorney General ever relate to you where he thought he was at on the road at the time of impact?
Only what everyone else has seen, that he said he believed he was on the road, in the middle of the road, I think was one of the statements he made. Most of these things I found as they came out in the news like everyone else did.
So did the Attorney General ever say to you that he was on the shoulder of the road at the time of impact?
We never had a discussion like that. He never said that to me.
Okay. Nothing further at this time, Mr. Chair.
Further questions of the committee? Representative Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here again today. Have you ever spent much time or ridden with the Attorney General when he's been a driver?
Not as a driver. The few times that I did travel with him, I drove.
Okay. Did you ever, after the fact of when all of this happened, ask him if he was on his phone or distracted at the time of the event?
I did not.
Okay. I'm good.
Any further questions? I know this has kind of been touched on before, but I want to simplify it and simplify it in a way that I could perhaps get it out. You met with him that morning, right? You discussed it, or you didn't discuss a lot, but you met with him that morning. Hey, good morning. How are you? Did he seem normal in his demeanor? I mean, just he seemed like everyday Jason Roundsberg.
Now, are we talking about
The
Sunday morning?
before you left back to Highmore.
Okay. He He was ready to go. When I pulled up to his house, he was on his way out the door. He was ready to go, hopping in the vehicle. I rolled down my window and said, "If you're ready, I'll just follow." And he said, "Okay." There wasn't a lot of conversation before we left town.
Okay, in your phone conversations, did it seem like voice tone and everything, just Jason Ravnsburg calling you, probably a little shook up because he had something, but nothing real noticeable out of a difference in attitude?
No, our conversation was the night before, and it was, like I said, it was late. He had been through the accident, so I chalked it up to, it's late, he hit something, his car is sitting there waiting for a record, so.
Okay, was there a noticeable shift in his demeanor once he discovered what it was that he hit?
I believe there was. Like I said, it appeared that the color was gone, and I've known him for quite a few years. He was very shook.
Okay, thank you. Further questions? Representative Hauger.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This was all Sunday, and you two apparently were basically the only two people in the office at the AG's office. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then you left later in the afternoon, and he was still there, correct?
For a short period of time, yes.
What time do you normally get into the office? The next Monday morning?
It varies anywhere between 7:30 and 8.
And was that about when you got in that following day?
Yeah, it would have been around that time.
Was he at the office by that time?
I do not recall.
Do you recall visiting with him that morning?
I know I visited with him on Monday. I want to say it was morning, but it was at some point on Monday I know we visited.
By the time you did speak with him, was he then in a state of mind where he was having conversation, or was he still quiet?
He was having conversations. He was a bit quieter than normal, but he was willing to converse.
All right. And you don't recall what time of day it was that you first visited with him?
I do not. I apologize.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Further questions? Hearing no further questions, again, on behalf of the committee, thank you very much for being willing to answer questions for us. I'd ask that you stick around and that we not release you quite yet of your subpoena, okay?
Okay.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.